We go now from the stories offered by students to a story told by someone who will profoundly shape policy. And what he does and what others he's working with do will be the subject of stories going forward. How will this urgency that we've been talking about change things, and how will that translate into policy? What kind of action is possible, and what will the priorities of that action be? How will inclusion and environmental justice actually be incorporated into policy? So I spoke with the new administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, Michael Regan. He's the former secretary of North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, where he established the state's first Environmental Justice and Equity Advisory Board. He is an alumnus of North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, an HBCU. He's the first Black man and first graduate of that historically Black college and university to run the EPA. He had a remarkable few moments, and I am delighted that we had an opportunity to speak, and I share that conversation with you now. Administrator Regan, thank you so much for joining us for this keynote conversation for the Planet Forward Summit and for the American Public Health Association's Health Policy Institute. It's great to see you.
Well, thank you, Frank. It's an honor to be here with you today.
I also want to welcome you back to the George Washington University. You're an alumnus, and so you're not quite back with us physically, but close.
Yeah, I'm hoping we get beyond COVID so I can revisit the campus and get reacquainted again.
I'm hoping we're going to get beyond COVID for a whole bunch of reasons.
That's right.
You're coming in here at a time of what I like to think of as records, right? 128 degrees in Death Valley last year, a record. 145 days in Phoenix, we heard from the mayor, over 100 degrees, a record. Rapidly melting Arctic ice. 95% of the oldest and thickest ice disappeared just since 1990. Is it too late?
Oh, those numbers, Frank, they frame the urgency. But that doesn't mean that the hope's lost. The answer is no, it is not too late. What I see in those numbers is opportunity to tackle these issues, but rebuild our economy and get our workers back on their feet, right? So we're gonna have to harness American ingenuity. We're good at this, Frank. We're a resilient country and we're good at this. And so I think people should understand that the statistics and the data frame the urgency, but that there should be a lot of optimism in this.
So where do you start? What's the most urgent thing you're going after here?
We got to rebuild our workforce and rebuild morale. That's number one. Number two, we've got to get science and data back at the heart of everything we do. So under my leadership, Frank, the workforce, the EPA employees, they will be a part of the solution. And we're going to go back to doing what we do best, which is relying on science, facts, and data.
The Trump administration rolled back or tried to roll back virtually every regulation that the Obama administration put in place, and others as well. Is there something there that is most important or most concerning to you?
All of them are important. All of them are concerning. And all of them are at the heart of President Biden's executive order to look at reevaluating all of those decisions. And Frank, this is why it's so important that science is at the heart of it, because we've got the scientific evidence and data that tells us what the right answers are. Now it's about operationalizing those correct answers, whether it be looking at methane from the oil and gas operations and their greenhouse gas contributions, or whether it be the contributions from cars and light trucks or mercury from power plants. The reality is that we need to re-inject science and data back into our process. And with that process, we make sure that we're running the gambit so that we can survive legal scrutiny, but do what we need to do to protect the economy and the planet.
You've said you're putting environmental justice at the heart of your plans and process to tackle climate change. So what will be different? What will communities that are seeing environmental justice at the heart of your plans see that they haven't seen or experienced before?
This is a perfect example of leadership starts at the top. And what I'm very proud of is the president has put environmental justice and equity at the forefront. there now is a newly established White House Environmental Justice and Equity Interagency Committee that doesn't put environmental justice pressure solely on EPA, but on the whole of government.
What changes for these communities?
Well, what will change is, number one, there will be a direct advisory council speaking to the White House and to the president about the issues that the communities are facing on the ground. That'll create another layer of connection to EPA and our National Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, which is advising me. And the reason I lay these layers out, Frank, is because this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. And so in North Carolina, as secretary, I stood up the first ever Environmental Justice and Equity Advisory Council. The reason being is we need these councils to educate us and engage us on a continual basis on what's happening on the ground, because as government, we think we know, we think we're doing the right thing, but even our best efforts are disconnected.
We've gotten some questions for you from some schools and students and faculty who make this their living. So I just want to share one of them with you now. This is from a GW student, a George Washington University student. Francesca Edrelin is her name. And we've seen her, we've heard some of her stories that she's done, but she has a good question. And she asks, how does the EPA plan to hold large-scale companies more accountable for their greenhouse gas emissions and other hazardous environmental consequences that impact some of the most vulnerable populations of our country?
That's a great question, Frank. And the realities are we have statutory authority through our Clean Air Act and our Clean Water Act to impose certain penalties for those who don't follow the rules of the road. Enforcement is what I would say, because our rules and our laws are only as good as our ability to enforce those. A lot of our companies want to be engaged, want to know what our expectations are. And so there's some carrots we can provide there as well. I believe that we should be transparent. I believe in the power of convening and bringing people to the table. I believe in exercising the powers that we have as an agency. And I also believe that we can use enforcement as a way to ensure that everyone is meeting our expectations and our goals.
Earlier in this series with Planet Forward, I spoke to the Reverend Lennox Yearwood. He started the Hip Hop Caucus.
Yes.
And he said, climate change is this generation's lunch counter moment.
Climate justice is racial justice, and racial justice is climate justice.
I mean, what does it really mean when you talk about environmental justice like this?
For decades, Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and other people of color have disproportionately borne the highest burdens of pollution. COVID-19 exacerbated that. And so what we're talking about here is the need to do better and do better now. And we're focused on that. And I think the emphasis that you're seeing in these advisory councils, in the money coming from these rescue plans, in the programs at EPA, we are really focused on setting up the right infrastructure internally so that we know how to deliver the new resources that the president and Congress are making available so that we can tackle these problems once and for all. Frank, I want to look at it through a couple of lenses. The first is ensuring that we understand the problem and that we're not being paternalistic. That means we have to have the partnerships on the ground. Secondly, I want to ensure the communities that I understand the power of enforcement and that we can enforce some rules on the books right now that will alleviate some of that pollution pressure. And then thirdly, these resources, the $50 million coming from the American Rescue Plan, the $6 million coming from EPA, we can directly infuse that capital right now to begin to alleviate that burden. But it takes and requires constant engagement, and I'm dedicated to that engagement.
If there's a lunch counter moment for this generation's voice really matters. So here's a question from a student from Eckerd College, Alex Gordon. Young people, Alex writes, especially those existing in frontline communities, will bear the brunt of our environmental decisions today. How are you incorporating the voices of young people in your current work and your plans?
First and foremost, if we look through history, young people are always at the tip of the spear for movements. And when I think about the voice and the power and the intensity that young people are bringing to this issue, it's really inspiring. And I've seen the movement. So what I've done, Frank, when I was secretary in North Carolina up through today, I'm continually engaging young people at all levels to get their perspective and asking them to keep the pressure on me.
From another student, this is a student at the college, at the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry, who asked, how might the EPA enlist faculty and students in science and environment programs at colleges and universities to advance this kind of environmental work? How are you going to be reaching out directly to them?
Listen, we're going to set up infrastructure here in the agency to engage directly with our high schools and our colleges. We understand how to tap into this network of professors and teachers, and we're going to do it directly through the infrastructure that we've set up. I also spent time earlier this week sitting down with the Secretary of the Department of Education, and there are lots of ways that we can tackle these issues through education, which is a perfect conduit to reach our younger constituencies.
You have restored the EPA's climate change webpage, which had been taken down, remarkably. What do you want people to read from that, both literally and figuratively?
I want people to read from that number one, it was ridiculous that it ever came down. The number two, climate change is real. We are serious about it. But bringing the website back is more than symbolism. That website will have tons of information and data to empower the citizens of this country to understand what's at stake and how they as individuals can join with us to curb the pollution that we're seeing that is exacerbating this issue.
What are the narratives that you use, or the narratives that you find is most salient?
When I speak to an individual, what I'm aiming for is for that individual to see themselves in the vision of the future that we're painting. If you're a company and you can't depend on the certainty of the weather or infrastructure or water quality, then there are going to be economic consequences. And you have to pay attention to that. Also, if you're a company and you're recruiting and trying to retain a workforce of young, energetic people, if you're not focused on sustainability and solving the climate crisis, you're more than likely to miss out on the best and the brightest that the future has to offer. You know, the story that I tell that's very personal to me is I grew up hunting and fishing with my father and grandfather in Eastern North Carolina, and I couldn't wait to wake up, to get outdoors, to be the first one to catch that fish, or see the latest or newest bird that I had discovered. But I also grew up with respiratory issues that were exacerbated by pollution. And so, there was a real strong connection to my ability to be outdoors with my father and grandfather. And listen, it was much deeper than just being outdoors and enjoying nature. It was about building that bond with my father and grandfather. The implications that we're seeing from climate, it will prevent young people like myself who enjoy building bonds with your father and grandfather through nature and other activities. It will prevent that from happening. So it will have an impact, not only on the environment, but the social fabric by which we build relationships. I think all of us can kind of see ourselves in some aspect of that.
I have a couple of other quick questions for you. I want to pose one to you from Gilbert Ajoyi. He's at Tuskegee University. His question is, can the EPA work with Congress to get to net zero greenhouse gas emission in transportation and mandate it?
Absolutely. Listen, we have the statutory authority and we're focused right now. The president's executive order told us to revisit specifically the cars and light duty trucks emission standards that we set before. We're working on that, and we're going to have a proposal soon. We're going to focus on pushing for zero emissions. And here's the reality. We can mandate these things, but the markets and technologies are already driving there.
So here's a question from Chris Boone. He's the Dean of the College of Global Futures at Arizona State University. And he asks, okay, what's the viability of a federal carbon tax under this administration?
All ideas are on the table. I think that we're talking about things collectively. When I say we, I mean everyone that's engaged.
You think in a 50-50 Senate, you're going to get a carbon tax through?
There are people in the House and the Senate and in the business community that are talking about carbon taxes. There are people in the House, the Senate, in our stakeholder community that are talking about clean energy standards. There are people talking about tax credits. The president's Build Back Better plan looks at some of all of this. And so here's the comforting thing coming from me as administrator of EPA. It won't be done by regulation alone. It'll be done by some combination of all of these things. And I'm just excited that we're seeing such a difference of opinion about how to get there versus the questioning of whether or not we need to get there and that climate change is real or not. I think we've made a lot of progress in this country.
You're an HBCU grad. Kamala Harris is an HBCU grad. You're the first Black man to lead the EPA. What does this mean?
I don't take it lightly that I'm the first Black man to lead this agency and that I'm representing the power of HBCUs, and so is the vice president. I'm very proud that I attended North Carolina A&T State University. It set a very strong foundation. I complemented that educational path with a good education from George Washington University. I've been able to apply the experiences of both throughout my career. And let me tell you, North Carolina A&T definitely prepared me for the challenges that I'm facing today. And I think it's easy for me to say that the vice president feels the same way about her education from Howard University.
I think we take a very strong message from what you shared with us today, and I thank you very much for it. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, Frank. I've been following your work for quite some time. Very proud to be here. And listen, please do track us, hold us accountable, and invite me back. I'd love to give you all an update.
Well, we will do all of those things. We will track them, we will hold them accountable, and we will invite them back. It was a very thoughtful conversation, I think. Not heavy on specifics because we're at the front end of this administration and they're reluctant to commit to much right now. The political divide in this town is going to be very significant in where they go. But one of the things that Regan and the EPA is able to do certainly is through the regulatory framework. That's what the Obama administration did. Certainly that's what the Trump administration did. And it's what the Biden administration will be doing. We'll be watching that very, very closely. Well, this 2021 Planet Forward Summit comes to a close now. Our theme, as I mentioned, coming in, urgency, action, and inclusion. We heard a lot about those things today, about the urgency of the moment and the urgency of the climate crisis, about the action that is possible and that is in many cases underway, but that needs to accelerate, and about the inclusion and the environmental justice that are required if this is going to gain the traction that it needs and embrace all the people who are going to be so profoundly affected if we fail, and all the people who will be so profoundly helped if we succeed. And of course, the storytelling, how we capture character, how we capture the drama, how we convey the moment, how we convey the story so that people are engaged, informed, and inspired to act. This has been a really fabulous time. We've all enjoyed hearing from our students in particular. Congratulations again to our StoryFest winners. We're going to hover for a few minutes in the Remo room, but before I do that, I want to offer a few thanks. First, once again, to our partners and our sponsors. You make this possible. Thank you for your generosity, for your investment in this project. We really appreciate it, and so do all the students and others who benefit from it. Thank you to our schools, who make their students available, who spread the word, and whose own actions, like with single-use plastics or any of these other things, inspire others and inspire the future. And thanks to the staff, to Dan Reed, to Kim Ossie, to Victoria Middleton, and to Tavon Blair. It's a mighty group of people who do amazing things, and all the stories that are posted in the summit that is here, and all that we have done is because of them. And a special shout out to Dan Reed, who's moving on to new challenges and new adventures in life. He's been with Planet Forward for 8 years. We will miss him, but he won't go far. And Dan, none of this would have been possible without you. And so you have a very personal, heartfelt thanks from me. If any of you, students and others, are interested in the opportunities that we mentioned earlier, the internships and the fellowships, we invite you to follow up with us. I want to put up a slide here now. If you're interested in one of the internships or opportunities we've mentioned, being a Planet Forward correspondent for that matter, we'd love to hear from you. Please visit us at planetforwardsummit.org. Please check in with us, get back to us. We'll follow that up. We'd also like to hear from you, by the way, if you enjoyed today's program, have some thoughts on the platform and any suggestions for us. If you want to stick around in the Remo room, I'm going to drop by for a little bit. A few of us will wander around. You can continue some networking or whatever bouncing around you want to do. We will see you back on your campus and our campus in person soon, we hope, healthy and strong. In the meantime, thank you for everything. Thanks for your stories. Thanks for moving the planet forward. Take care and have a great rest of the day.